Good evening, all. I can't think of a more exciting way to end our 80th anniversary weekend celebration with the wonderful speaker we have this evening. And it's my privilege to introduce tonight Ted Kennedy Jr., who was first elected to the Connecticut State Senate in November 2014, again in 2016, to serve the communities of Brantford, my community, Durham, Guilford, Killingworth, Madison, and North Brantford. Senator Ted brings with him a wealth of experience in the private and public sectors. He received his bachelor's degree at Wesleyan University and graduated from the Yale University School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. Ted received his law degree from the University of Connecticut School of Law. The senator's commitment to health care issues began at an early age. Senator Ted was 12 years old when he was diagnosed with bone cancer and needed to have his right leg amputated. He underwent months of intensive physical therapy and was eventually able to resume an active life, including learn how to ski using adaptive equipment. And I can remember on a personal note, your eulogy for your dad. When you said, "I can't do it, Dad," and your dad said, "If you put your mind to do it, you can do it." And you've done it. Thank you. As a teenager, he trained with the U.S. handicapped ski team and won several national medals. He understood how people like him faced a two-part struggle: the personal challenges of recovery and the public challenge of living in a society that did little to include people with disabilities. Since then, Ted has been a committed advocate for the self-determination and civil rights of people with disabilities. Currently, Senator Edward Kennedy Jr. is an attorney with Epstein, Becker, Green, a firm that practices in healthcare and life sciences. He was recently elected chair of the board of the American Association of People with Disabilities. And once again, on a personal note, I serve as a chaplain to the Senate, and when I'm called to be up there for the prayer, I'm always sure I'm seated behind Senator Kennedy and Senator Looney, so people know what side of the aisle I'm on. Senator Ted.
Thank you, Monsignor. Wow, what an introduction. I'm always grateful when the Monsignor sits next to me, particularly if there's people taking pictures, because it's always good if you're in politics to get photographed with somebody with a collar on. I'm just trying political advice. Wow, there are so many people here tonight. I mean, do you eat like this every Sunday night? I mean, no wonder St. Thomas More is, bulging at the seams. I mean, you should go other parts of the diocese, they're dragging people, they're trying to beg people to come in and celebrate Mass. But I guess it helps to have good community and good food. Did somebody say that? So listen, thank you so much for the introduction and for inviting me to be one of your special guest speakers for the 80th anniversary of St. Thomas More Chapel and Catholic Center here. I was a little nervous, I have to be honest with you, when last spring I was invited to be one of the guest speakers here. For one thing, I realized, why are they asking me? I mean, I'm not even a very good Catholic. And secondly, I was a little nervous walking in, and I'll tell you why. Because about a month ago, I was asked to speak at the Connecticut Bar Association. And as I was walking up to the microphone, somebody handed me something. I didn't know what it was, and I looked down, and it said, Ted Kennedy Jr. Speaker Evaluation Form. And of course, if any of you have ever had to come and be a guest speaker, you know that's the last thing you wanted. And I go, I was so nervous. And some of these forms were actually just recently shared with me. And I'll never forget this one that I got. It said, if I had only 1 hour to live, I would choose to spend it at one of your presentations. And I thought that was, how beautiful a sentiment. And there was a little arrow instructing me to turn the card over, which I did. and it said, "Because only at one of your presentations does an hour seem like an eternity." So I promised I would keep my remarks to 20 or 30 minutes and maybe have some time for questions. But I know many of you have to go back and study up for your exams next week. I've been asked to share with you some of my life's work in the cause of disability inclusion, the final frontier in civil rights and social justice. And so we'll explore tonight, what is disability discrimination? What are disability rights? The Supreme Court has said that describes disability discrimination as any time somebody is isolated or segregated because of their disability. That is a form of discrimination. And I'm really pleased to know that Pope Francis, the Holy Father, has been very active on this issue. He said, "No single person is more valuable than another, especially when it comes to those with disabilities." He said, "The world does not become better because only apparently perfect, not to mention fake, people live there," he said. "But when human solidarity, mutual acceptance, and respect increase." So I'm really pleased to know, and we'll talk in a minute about the specific things that the faith communities around the country have done to advance the cause of disability justice. But it's really, I'm really glad that this community really thinks about not just what goes on inside that chapel and inside this center, but how we live our lives once we leave this place. Of course, I can't continue continue with my remarks without at least speaking briefly about our dear friend, Father Bob, because his presence today is really, really missed. I spoke to him about speaking at this evening's event. His spirit is everywhere, and I know that the 80th anniversary was due to coincide with his 25 years as chaplain, and he had such tremendous compassion and commitment to social justice, and he was the quintessential campus minister, warm and approachable, and loved life, and as he said, an abundant life, which is really had me thinking the incredible testaments and eulogies to just not what is a great life, but what is an abundant life, and on his belief that it is in serving other people and service to others that really gives us meaning and self-worth in our life, and that is really, and yeah, you can clap because that's true. He communicated and connected with people just in such a personal way, and even in his illness, he was always thinking of other people, and the grace that he approached his illness and the acceptance. He had the same disease that took my father 9 years ago. It was just a really powerful lesson. So this chapel has also served as an important place for my family and my extended family. Many of you knew and went to school with my cousins, Tim Shriver and his son Timbo, who also graduated from Yale. But the Shriver family were frequent communicants and altar servers here at St. Thomas More, and we know that there weren't that many Catholics. We heard from the Monsignor back in 1938, my uncle, Sarge Shriver, graduated from Yale, and he was the father of the Peace Corps, the war on poverty, fought for legal aid, the idea that everyone in the United States should be afforded an attorney, whether you could afford one or not. That was a novel idea back then, but not to Sarge. I think a lot of his work, and as I will talk about in a minute, a lot of the work of my family was really tempered and inspired by their faith in the Catholic Church. I too enjoyed attending Mass here, and when the time came to baptize my son Teddy, who's now 20 years old, we could think of no other place for him to begin his Catholic journey than right here at St. Thomas More. So being here tonight really brings back so many incredible memories. My faith is really not something that I talk about. honestly. As I said before, because I really consider myself an imperfect Catholic. But most people know that the Kennedys are Catholic, and it's our experience as Catholics that has really shaped our worldview and our political philosophy. You know, my grandmother Rose was the glue. She was the matriarch and the spark plug in our family's life. And she was an incredibly faithful woman who, of course, was a daily communicant and all that. But I think her life growing up in Boston, experiencing a lot of the struggles that the immigrant Catholic community had in Boston, and the idea that they were not accepted, that no Catholics need apply, no Irish need apply, was really imbued in her. And she told us when we were growing up, the immigrant story. It wasn't just unique to the Irish. It was many immigrant groups. And I think one of the, she was never allowed in any of the social clubs. She went to Dorchester High School, graduated at the top of her class, played the piano, spoke German, spoke French, but she was never invited anywhere because all the parties and the clubs were dominated by the WASP, the Boston Brahmin community, who her father, the then mayor, John F. Fitzgerald of Boston, being the good Democrat that he was, would rail against these special interests in his in his political speeches. So his daughter was then never invited to any of the fancy parties of the people that he had spent all week long criticizing. But it's even my uncle, President Kennedy. Was an interesting relationship between my Uncle Jack and the Catholic Church, because we all know that he was the first Irish Catholic president of the United States, and what we don't really realize is that that was the issue. And if you talk to people who were around back then, they will tell you that his Catholicism was the defining issue of that political year. And my Uncle Jack wrote to a friend, and this is all chronicled in David Nassau's book, The Patriarch, which was about my grandfather. He wrote a letter to a friend. He said, I've been to Choate and Harvard. Okay, that's the other school. I know. I shouldn't mention that. I went to Choate and Harvard, nearly lost my life in military service, was elected to national office 5 times, served 13 years in Washington. I'm not identified as the best qualified candidate, but as the Catholic candidate. And, he made several important speeches about the separation of church and state, and how his public and personal positions would never be determined by church doctrine, which was the concern back then. And we've seen that issue come up again, most recently, I think, when Mitt Romney ran for president. And I, of course, am a member of a different party, but I thought it was so unfair the way that our country and people would criticize because they didn't understand the Church of Latter-day Saints or Mormonism, and they criticized him for his faith. And I was kind of hoping that we kind of moved on from that, but, evidently not. But it's interesting because David Nassau says in the book that the Catholic Church itself, it nearly cost JFK the election. How? Well, many prominent church leaders, the bishops and the cardinals, basically said that JFK was wrong, that a Catholic cannot compartmentalize his or her faith in such a way and call it a private matter. They said religion is never a private matter and always has a bearing on people in political life, which is, of course, the exact opposite thing that my uncle was trying to say. In fact, that many of the hierarchy at that time did not think that JFK was a very good Catholic and didn't want him to be the representative of Catholicism in American life. So anyway, it's interesting how, when we think back back, of course, there's a lot of pride in that fact, but at the time, it was much more complicated than we think. When I think about the Catholic faith and Catholicism and how the faith has influenced my family, I think of my father. And I have a copy of his Mass card, which I bring with me everywhere I go as a reminder. And on his Mass card, he wrote, or this is in his book, True Compass, which was his memoir, he said that it's enormously significant to me that the only description in the Bible about salvation is tied to one's willingness to act on behalf of one's fellow human beings. I'm going to cry now because I always do when I read this, because it was the center of his life and what motivated him to be in public life as other members of my family. He said, "My center of belief is the great Gospel of Matthew, in which he calls on us to care for the least of these among us, and feed the hungry, and clothe the naked, and give drink to the thirsty, welcome the stranger, visit the imprisoned. My faith has always been my foundation and my inspiration. It is the most positive force in my life and the cause of my eternal optimism. My faith has always brought me home." So I think, as you can hear, I think my family's growing up Catholic, it wasn't just a religion, it was an identity, it's true. But it guided my relatives, I think, principles of basic fairness and their principles of the collective good and having compassion and sympathy for other people and putting government to work for people who need it and make the government and all its tools to provide good neighborhoods and schools and standing up for people without a voice. That is, I think, the kind of Catholic Church that I grew up in, and I think, still motivates me today. My family, it got involved in the area of disability law and disability rights because of my Aunt Rosemary, my father's sister. Rosemary, who was born with an intellectual disability. And my grandfather had tremendous resources, but back then it was if you were a child with a disability, it was extreme. There were very little resources, no schools, people were isolated and segregated. And I think it was the presence of Rosemary in my family's life that actually tempered my father and my uncle's commitment to social justice and helping people, because I think my Uncle Jack understood her challenges in a very personal way. And when he challenged Americans to fight for fairness and to serve others rather than themselves, I think he derived this belief from my Aunt Rosemary, who was, again, born with an intellectual disability, because he witnessed firsthand how differently she was treated and how often she was ignored and excluded. And he understood firsthand the pain that millions of families feel as they watch a sibling struggle for social acceptance, or a parent search in vain for an educational program or a job opportunity to promote independence. And he understood that the issues facing Rosemary, the barriers facing Rosemary, were not just the challenges of her own disability, but instead the ignorant stereotypes that exist in our society. And he believed also that society had so much to gain by inclusion of people with disabilities. And as a disability lawyer and now as a state senator, I really am inspired by my uncle's work, by my father's work, and the work that I do today. So because the history of disability in our country is one of isolation. For many years, people with disabilities were segregated, were sent off to institutions, many of them beautiful. There's some that still exist in our state, are very beautiful places far beyond the social centers of our society, and where people were cut off from family and friends and no control over their own lives and treated like inmates, and no opportunity for integration. So in other parts of the world, the status of people with disabilities is frightening and alarming. And we need to do more to ensure that everybody on a worldwide basis is afforded dignity and equality. But in other parts of the world, it's been said that about 1 out of every 3 beggars, for example, is somebody with a disability around the world. And people, when the people were growing up, certainly didn't look at disability as a civil rights issue or as a human rights issue. And that's one of the things that I'm working so hard to change today. Because even I grew up, and if you were born in the early 60s like myself, you know the images that we had about the poor, helpless, innocent person with a disability, or the alternative image was the superhero with a disability. But really, we are trying to eliminate the physical barriers, the educational barriers, create equal opportunity in the workplace and housing and transportation, so people can live independently. That's what it's all about. And we have these gigantic systems that perpetuate dependency for people with disabilities, and that's something that I'm trying to change. I've decided not to seek re-election to the state Senate. I've loved my job there. And I've really, it's a great opportunity to serve. If any of you are interested in running for public office, particularly in local or in the state legislature, I think it's a great opportunity because the states are really where all the action is now. We've all seen the political gridlock that exists in Washington, D.C., but it's possible to really get a lot done. I, for example, in the last 4 years, authored and passed over 70 pieces of legislation that were signed into law, all with bipartisan support. So it is a place that you can get things done, and it is, encouraging that it is possible to have debates on these important topics. But I felt like looking at what has happened in the changes that were happening in Washington, D.C., not to get political with you, okay, tonight, but a lot of the changes that were happening in Washington, D.C. Was frightening, and I felt like I've been a board member of AAPD, an organization that was founded by Senator Bob Dole, incidentally, always working in a bipartisan way until now. Disability rights have become, unfortunately, a partisan issue. But one of the things that I chair an organization, AAPD, American Association of People with Disabilities. If you're interested, I invite you all to take a look at the website and look at the initiatives that we're involved with. I'm particularly involved with an issue called the Disability Equality Index, called the DEI. What I'm trying to do, and I've been working on this for about 3 or 4 years now, is to benchmark companies based on their disability, equality, and inclusion. And right now I'm working with about 150 companies, 97 Fortune 500 companies. These are the leaders in disability equality. And my goal is to get the entire Russell 2000 to adopt the principles of the Disability Equality Index. It won't be easy, but I'm trying to elevate. You know how many people have been interested in so-called ESG, or corporate social responsibility, looking at climate change or workers' rights or LGBT rights or women on boards and the like, and are looking at the cluster of issues related to corporate social responsibility. I'm trying to make disability inclusion one of those things. Tell people which companies are doing the right thing and which ones aren't doing the right thing. And I'm later on this month, we have a major event that we're doing on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange with the company consulting firm Accenture. And I'm not going to try to, because there's going to be a little voila moment later on this month. But just Accenture, what they've done is a comprehensive analysis of the profitability and share price of companies that do inclusion and the ones that don't. And so we need to break the idea break the idea that if you incorporate people with disabilities, you give somebody a job, you make your facilities accessible, that somehow that's going to cost you, okay, or drive up your insurance rates. In fact, the opposite is true. When you include people in your culture, in your corporation, in your culture, you make people with disabilities included, that actually drives business success and profitability. And of course, what we're trying to do is get everybody who is able and willing to work, who wants a job, should be able to get a job and work and support themselves. So I could go on and on, but I won't. I just think, it's in closing, the church can play a really important role in disability inclusion as well. America Magazine published in August of 2016 a great article, How to Make Room in Your Parish for People with Disabilities. Wondering why more people with disabilities don't come to Mass. Are they living in the shadows of parish life? Talking about mentors. We all need mentors in the world. I mean, I tell my kids, even Tiger Woods needs a coach. We can be the best at everything, but we all need a mentor and a coach, and including people in the church and people with disabilities. We don't see too many successful people in law, in medicine, in the faith community, honestly, that people can aspire to, and we need more of that. My friend Ginny Thornburg, who is the wife of our former Attorney General, Dick Thornburg. You remember he was the governor of Pennsylvania, served as the Attorney General under the first President Bush. Ginny and Dick Thornburg have been incredible advocates for people with disabilities. Again, when it was like a bipartisan thing to talk about. But Ginny has written a number of books on disability inclusion, and if you're interested in learning more, I can speak to you after the program tonight. So I am going to conclude my remarks. Do we have time for...
We do.
Questions? Okay. But again, I just want to say in conclusion, it's great, again, to be invited to be one of the special guests here at the 80th anniversary of St. Thomas More. And my prayer tonight is that this community is even more successful in the next 80 years. Thank you so much for asking me to speak. So do we have what we have? Are there any questions? Yes, sir.
So I've only been here attending STM for a year. What I have found interesting in doing this 80-year celebration is hearing members from the past who have stories about how the parish was back when they were attending. Could you speak about how STM has changed, or what has stayed the same, or since you're being in this?
Well, to be honest with you, St. Thomas More has not been my home parish. My home parish is St. Mary's in Brantford. Oh, I see Chris Ford back there, Father Ford. So nice of you to attend this. See, he's my former pastor, and he participated in my children's with their confirmation, and even my wife, if you can believe it, did not grow up Catholic, but converted. And I would complain to Father Ford. I said to Father Ford, because I think, Father Ford, you are the reason why my wife became a Catholic, because you too have an incredible gift, and the power of the Holy Spirit flows through you every day of the week. But they don't make it easy to go. It takes a year, do you know, to become a Catholic. It takes a year and all these classes. But one great thing that Father Ford, he does a beautiful Mass, and I know that Father Bob also did on Easter Vigil with the fire and and now my wife, she insists that every year we go to that Mass because, you know, it's the new people coming into the faith, and it's so inspiring. I mean, I don't, get really jazzed up about anything, a lot of things, but I do actually, it's very inspiring when people decide, I want to become part of this community, especially later on in life after they've really had the chance to think about it and are proactive and put so much effort in it. So anyway, I did not come here, but frequently as a parishioner, so I can't really speak. But of course, I was here before this whole center, and remember the incredible addition that this was. And this didn't happen magically. It happened because a lot of people, wanted to see a Catholic center. And look, by the evidence of all these people here tonight and the incredible overflowing crowds at all the different services here, you can tell that something magical is happening here at St. Thomas More. So I do enjoy coming whenever I do. Yes. Hi.
I'm in 6th grade. I just wanted to know, your preference on inner city schools and how we can get kids my age can get more education or can get bigger chances to learn about disability rights and feel like I see.
Well, that's really, really important. Thank you for that question. Until 1975, okay, that was not that long ago. I'm looking at you. Kids with disabilities were not afforded a public school education in the United States until 1975. So after kids with disabilities started going to school and interacting with their classmates, I think a new generation has grown up interacting with kids and looking at it, not because when you go to school with somebody who's exactly like you, whether it's from a disability perspective or ethnic or racial perspective, it really tempers the way that you think about diversity. And so I think that now I'm grateful that we have much more participation with students with disabilities. We can do better. And we should do more. And I just think educating people about this subject, again, I have a right, I went to law school. I came to New Haven, as you heard in the introduction, as a student at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. I'm very interested in the public health impacts of environmental contamination. And as a cancer survivor, I'm very concerned about exposure to toxic chemicals and whatnot. And got very involved here in the city of New Haven on the issue of pediatric lead poisoning. And lead poisoning is still one of the leading known causes of intellectual disability, even right here in the city of New Haven. So I think of the environment. When I think about the environment, yes, we have to preserve and protect our beautiful natural resources, but we also have to do more to help our urban environment and et cetera. So anyway, I think that keep asking questions that you do, and think about going into public life one day or so. Yes, maybe one more question, because I know the hour is late. I'm still going to be here for a while, so if you have any other questions, you can come.
Just can you comment briefly on specifically disabilities due to mental health and what are the directions happening, at least in the state these days, if not nationally?
Are you talking about mental health? I'm really glad that you brought that up, because one of the things that I've worked on since being in the legislature, where we've made some progress, but not enough, is the area of mental health. My wife, who's a psychiatrist here at Yale, used to work at DOH, the University Health Service, and they've seen a dramatic increase in the number of people who are seeking mental health services here. And it's not just happening here at Yale. It's happening all over the country. And perhaps it's because people feel more comfortable now picking up the phone or going and seeing, and it's free. Okay, so free therapy. So if you're a student and you need therapy, get it because it's free, right? And it costs a lot of money to see a psychiatrist once you graduate. But anyway, but we can be doing more. And what the issue that I'm talking about is looking at health plans and looking at, parity means that you treat mental conditions and physical conditions the same. But when you look at the number of denials for mental health and addiction services compared to medical surgical, so you look at things like anxiety, depression, alcohol abuse, and you compare those conditions with cancer or diabetes or or broken bones or something like that. If you need to see a specialist and you break your knee, there's no problem. No problem. You'll be able to see the best knee doctor in New Haven, okay? And there are a lot of good doctors here in New Haven. But if you have depression or anxiety or substance abuse disorder, you're on your own. Even people with really good insurance. In fact, in Connecticut, if you have Medicaid, if you're on Medicaid, you have better mental health care than if you have Aetna, Blue Cross, Cigna, United Healthcare. That's the reality. And so I've been working really hard at trying to encourage health plans to actually implement mental health parity. In New York State, there have been a number of settlements looking at the major health plans in New York State and looking at and all of the health plans in New York State deny coverage for mental health and addiction services I'm talking about 2 to 7 times more likely to be denied. And we're not that far from New York. So we need to do a better job. And there's a website called Parity Track, if you're interested in this, that's just graded all the states. It's actually run by my brother Patrick, who served in Congress, who's now a big mental health advocate, and they track all the different states and grade them. And Connecticut got a D. Okay, we think we're doing a good job, but we're not doing a very good job. And so I thank you very much for that question. So look, I'm going to be over here, and I'm not leaving. Do we get any dessert too? Is there? I mean, this is pretty good. Anyway, I just want to say thank you to the St. Thomas More community for inviting me to be your special guest. And Monsignor, thank you for those kind words. And I wish you guys all the luck in the world. You have a great. Thank you so much for welcoming me here. I feel so welcome, and looking around the room, I see a lot of familiar faces, and I know that St. Thomas More isn't just popular with the Yale community, but the faith community extends way beyond where we are right now. So thank you. You're doing a lot of great. Just stay here for a second, okay?
Senator, thank you for those very kind words about St. Thomas More, but also for your very strong and powerful words on behalf of people with disabilities, not only for what you are doing personally and what you've experienced personally, but also what your family has done over the years. So we are very grateful for all that you've done and all that will come to be. And I can certainly think that we can all agree that with you as the chair of the board of American Association of People with Disabilities, things will move forward in a very positive way and hopefully very quickly.
Thank you.
Okay? Now, for a bit of fun, okay?
What
the heck is this, right? You mentioned your uncle, the president, right? I'm going to give you a test. All right? I was standing on Elm Street in 1962 of May when he came across the old campus.
Yeah.
And at that time, he was the first honorary degree recipient to speak at a Yale graduation. And he made one particular statement. Do you know what it was?
Yes, I do know what it was.
Will you give it to us?
He said, now I have the best of both worlds, a Harvard education and a Yale degree.
Yeah. I was there.
Am I right?
You're right.